Hello, respected dignitaries, Shravan sir, and everyone present over here. My name is Pranit, currently pursuing chemical engineering first year. It's my privilege to host this session. Now, let's start with invocation by Madhu.
Yeah. Thank you, Pranit. Powerful we are, compassionate we are, genius we are, adventurous we are, disruptive we are, distinctive we are, beautiful we are, revolutionaries we are, empathetic we are, courageous we are, grateful we are, attentive we are, learners we are, incitement we are, rebellious we are, thoughtful we are, inspiring we are, leaders we are, jealous we are, champions we are, yes, powerful we are.
Thank you, Madhu, for wonderful invocation. A day with gratitude is being happy. Let's hear a gratitude story by Spurti.
I have a story to tell. I used to learn Carnatic music from my music teacher, who is very experienced in her profession. There was a girl who was keen to learn music and she asked me to teach her. Though I didn't know ev- everything regarding music, I was amazed her at her interest to learn and I taught her some basic rags. Now I stopped learning but she's continuing. Whenever we come across, she recognizes me as the one who taught her music and just says thank you. I really like the way she expressed her gratitude though she is young. Gratitude is a powerful that age does not matter to be grateful. Her innocent face and pure heart mesmerizes me every time. From Shravanti.
Thank you, Spurti. Now, let's know about our amazing and extraordinary personality, Shrikant Joshi sir. We are very glad to have you, sir. He completed his B.Tech from University College of Technology, Usmania University. Did his MS Chemical Engineering from Rensselaer. He completed his PhD Chemical Engineering from University of Ireland. Sir is presently working as professor at University West in Production Technology, West Department of Engineering Science. Worked as an additional director at ARCI. Worked as Dean, School of Engineering Sciences and Technology. Sir also worked as scientist in Defense Metallurgical Research Laboratory. Sir was also research associate in University of Idaho. Sir has specialties in additive manufacturing, surface engineering, laser metal materials processing. Wow, I was overwhelmed reading this. So let's start. It's an interactive session, so let's start with a question. What is the advice you want to give for young chemical engineers who are listening to you, sir?
What's an advice? Wow, that's a really tough question. Uh, but my advice would be essentially that make the best of the time at College of Technology. I assume most of you are from there, since you said advice to chemical engineers. Become good chemical engineers because, in my view, chemical engineers are perhaps the most versatile of all the engineers, right? I honestly think I'm not a chemical engineer anymore. I've gone far away from chemical engineering, but the fact that I studied to be a chemical engineer gave me all the right tools to be able to do that. So work hard, uh, be disciplined, and become a good chemical engineer. That'll take you far in whichever direction you want to go later on.
Yes, sir, that is true.
Let me be also very candid. This is my first Top Talk because of various reasons. I have not been able to attend any of the earlier talks, so I'm kind of clueless about the format. Uh, but consider it to be a free format. Go ahead and ask whatever you want to ask, and let's have fun for the next hour or hour and a half.
It was a wonderful advice, sir. So my next question is, what problems did you face in your journey of chemical engineering?
What problems did I face during my
In your journey,
journey as a chemical
yeah,
engineer? Uh-huh.
yes.
I don't know where to start. First of all, let me begin by telling you how I got into chemical engineering, right? I mean, I got in, frankly, by default. Uh, as usual, like all my classmates at that time, I guess, everyone wrote for the entrance exam to IITs. I felt pretty good about my chances to get in, so I had not applied anywhere else. I'd only written the IIT entrance. and then I bombed my physics exam in the IIT entrance, and then the next thing I know, I didn't know have a clue what to do. So I actually went and applied for BSc in Nizam College, because I had not applied to any other engineering college at that time. And that only left MSET. So I wrote MSET, uh, got a pretty good rank, 107, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And then there was the big question about what branch I should choose. Uh, I had I was quite clueless, but at the same time, I was open-minded. I was ready to do anything, right? And at that time, one of my cousins, who's 4 years my senior, uh, was a final year student in College of Technology, Swati Bhogle. Uh, so I picked chemical engineering pretty much because of what I would sometimes see her study and look at her books. And I had this wrong notion, which I'm sure many of you had, that chemical engineering is very close to chemistry. And chemistry was my favorite subject. So those were the only two reasons I picked chemical engineering, because I liked chemistry and because my cousin was doing chemical engineering. Uh, so with that kind of a start, there were many surprises when I started learning chemical engineering. I soon found that uh, chemistry was a subject, but chemical engineering was far from chemistry, right? So it was quite different. Uh, then I, I I had challenges in uh, especially finding thermodynamics extremely difficult. I couldn't get the hang of thermodynamics at all. Uh, to add to that, uh, I think we were not taught thermodynamics in the first place at college, and uh, I think thermodynamics is one of the pillars of chemical engineering. And for a long, long time, I felt that I didn't have a good foundation. Although one cruises through the exams, sits in canteens, does homework, gets through uh, all the end sem exams, maybe gets good grades as well. But deep down, you need to feel confident about having a good foundation. And for a long time, even after I finished my chemical BTech, chemical engineering, actually, I felt that I didn't know any thermodynamics, and therefore I was not a good enough chemical engineer. And that's not a good feeling. If you want to stick to an academic line, it's not a good feeling to think that you lack one or more of the foundations. So make sure that doesn't happen to you, because it's not a very comfortable feeling. So my problem, uh, uh, beginning and the end of it, was thermodynamics while I was doing BTech. So I can see Sajeev smiling, because yeah, we almost didn't have a single class of thermodynamics, and I don't know how one becomes a chemical engineering without thermodynamics. Uh, but just to carry that story forward a little bit further, the book that we followed for thermodynamics, which was subscribed, I won't say followed, but the prescribed book for us was by Abbott and Van Ness. I don't know if it's the same book now or it's changed, but at that time the book prescribed was Abbott and Van Ness. As fate would have it, uh, I got uh, a chance via a fellowship to go to Rensselaer. So when I went there, uh, when you're young, you're kind of idealistic, and you're not scared about anything. Uh, so I said, there's one subject in chemical engineering that I do not know, and that's thermodynamics. And therefore, in my first semester, I should take thermodynamics at the graduate level. So I took a master's course in thermodynamics. And the person teaching that course was Abbott. Yeah. And I think that was the hardest 4 months I've had in my life, because his expectations were huge. I knew nothing about thermodynamics, and even to do a simple assignment, it used to take me a whole week, almost not sleeping at all at night, just to uh, perhaps answer at that time what, in his opinion, must have been very simple questions. But yeah. Uh, so you asked me what was a problem for me in chemical engineering. That's a long answer to that short question.
Yeah, even it was problem, you faced it and you learned many things, no, sir. It was very good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, you don't enjoy it while it while it's going on, but in hindsight, it's always satisfying that you manage to kind of get over a pretty significant problem, I would say.
Yes, sir. Does anyone have questions? Can raise hands.
Yes, yes, Pranit.
Yeah, Rohit.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much, sir, Srikanth, sir. You said you are not into Top Talks, but we believe that you have given whole summary of Top Talk through our mentor call. We had
Ah, yeah.
about
No,
one and a half
I
hours.
actually I actually misunderstood what a talk meant, and that's why I clarified couple of times that are you sure you don't want me to talk, because then I would have probably postponed the interaction a little bit. So by talk, I imagined that I'm supposed to make slides and prepare for it and do all that kind of stuff. So
Your
yeah.
words are your presentation, and your feelings are your thoughts. So thank you for that. Thank you very much for your talk on the other day and for today also. Just I had a doubt. What is it like to be completing PhD by the age of 30? Of course, PhD doesn't matter about age and all. Just had a thought. What is it like to be completing PhD in chemical engineering by the age of 30? By the age of 25. Sorry, by the age of
Uh,
25.
as you rightly said, age is not important, right? I mean, these days. Uh, you could in many universities enroll directly for PhD after your bachelor's degree. You don't even need to get a master's degree in between. So uh, I think people who are clear about wanting to do a PhD, several of them uh, very effortlessly do it at a young age, 25, 26, 27 maybe maximum. But so it's not hard to get your PhD wrapped up uh, by approximately that age. Uh, how does it feel to be a PhD, regardless of when you finish it? I think it's a good feeling. It's a mixture of many emotions. It's also relief, sometimes depending upon how tough your supervisor is, because it's not like coursework, right? I mean, it's not that you do 8 semesters, write exams at the end of every semester, and surely after 8 semesters, if you have passed every exam, you're done. PhD is not like that. Normally your supervisor has to be satisfied, first of all, that you have accomplished enough uh, to be given a chance to defend your PhD thesis or whatever. So I had an exceptionally tough supervisor from South Korea. He was a South Korean guy. So for me, the biggest emotion was relief. The the moment I finished my PhD. But yeah, it's a fun journey. Different people look at PhD from a different standpoint. Uh, for me, PhD was uh, not specifically uh, about uh, what problem I solved as a part of my PhD, but for me it was getting to know a process, learning how do you identify a problem which is unique, how do you over a long period of time set yourself smaller goals to reach the end objective of solving that problem, how to be an independent researcher, because uh, especially if you do PhD uh, at any good university abroad, uh, you are expected to be fully independent. I mean, There is rarely any spoon feeding, right from picking the problem to solving it. You you have to kind of make your own plans, find your own solutions. They could uh, be poor solutions sometimes, but you improve upon them. Your supervisor is around to bounce your ideas off him, but he's not spoon feeding you, right? So I think that entire procedure is a great learning experience, because if I look at myself now, uh, the 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 actual PhD problem that I solved is history, right? I mean, I don't think I have used, except for maybe the first 2 3 years professionally, I have ever used specifically that technical learning. But then whenever I've gone on to do research in new areas, that part of my PhD becomes very handy to get started on an entirely new problem that you have never encountered before, or even imagining a problem which uh, actually nobody else is solving at any given time. So for me, PhD is that kind of a journey, uh, which is exciting.
Yes, sir. It depends on various factors, and we should be on that. Uh, no stone to be unturned. We should turn all the stones and get to see what are the results. Thank you.
Hmm?
Should
Hello,
be any more? Yes, sir. Thank you.
hello, sir. How are you? And I'm Nivedita.
Hi, Nivedita. Hmm?
Yes, sir. Actually, from in our calls, at the start of our call, like I was facing some difficulty in physics. So you have given me some clarity by knowing about my problem and trying to solve it. That has helped me a lot with the ideas which you have given me with Excel sheets and everything, and asking me to spend more time on physics. So I want to know, as your mentee, I want to know who is your mentor who supported you in your difficulty times or in decision making, uh, in decision makings,
Hmm?
good decision makings.
Right. Honestly, it'll be very hard to pinpoint a single mentor. I mean, there've been different mentors at different stages of my life. To be truthful, sometimes at any given stage, I've had different mentors to sort out different issues. Right. Sometimes it could be technical. Sometimes it could be just planning. That what do I want to do after I finish my BTech? I mean. It need not be the same guy to whom I go with doubts in thermodynamics or physics, right? So you could have different mentors at different stages, or uh, just about how to be disciplined, right? So i- it's hard to say who my single most influential mentor was, but if I were to pick one, I would still go for reasons not so obvious to you, maybe. I would go with my PhD supervisor as my single most important mentor. And I say this not because he taught me things that are technical, but he taught me how to be meticulous with everything that I do. He taught me uh, how to how to immediately and quickly start swimming if you are thrown into the rough waters without any expectation. Uh, he taught me to work harder than anybody else, I guess, in the world, uh, because he was extremely critical of everything that I did. So I hated him those 4 years, but in hindsight, I think I learned a lot, if not from him, because of him, right? So for me, that was he, Dr. Jin Park was my single most important mentor, I think.
Wow, thank you, sir. Actually, I really liked one point from not because of sir. So thank you for it, sir.
Yeah, Madhu, you can ask. You raised your hand.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for giving a
Hmm?
talk. Yeah. My question
Hi,
is,
Madhu. Hmm.
yeah, what would you recommend students after completing their BTech in chemical engineering? Would you like to them opt for job or go for higher studies?
Hmm. Again, very tough question. Partly because it's very personal in the sense there is not a single recommendation that fits every one of you, because it has a lot to do with aptitude and your own goals in life. So I would stay away from making a recommendation in that respect. Uh, Apart from that, there is also this important matter of opportunity, right? I mean, uh, I, I I have many students talk to me, not just who I mentor, but they just find me from somewhere and say, "Oh, can I connect with you on Zoom and stuff like that?" And the questions are similar, uh, saying that, "Oh, should I do a job? Should I do PhD or?" Uh, should I go with masters? Should I stay with chemical engineering or should I go to MBA? Right? I mean, these are very usual uh, questions that people have when they approach a crossroad. Right? If you guys finish your BTech, that's one crossroad. So you should not be worried if you feel confused, right? Because everybody is confused. Let me tell you, when I finished or was finishing my BTech, uh, I wrote the IIM entrance. I applied for a PhD abroad. I applied for a PhD at Indian Institute of Science. I also applied for jobs, right? So uh, that's a very typical situation. You don't have to worry about that. Uh, However, I think in your mind, you must make a pecking order that if I had all these options in front of me, which one would I choose? So I think it's always nice to have that clarity in your own mind. But it's absolutely okay to try all options, if it's even if it's number two, number three on your list of preferences. Because the worst thing that you want to do is sit at home, right, after you graduate. That's one thing you absolutely don't want to do, right? So you could have option one, option two, even option 10, but uh, it's important to pick one depending upon what you have on your plate when it comes time to make a decision. Uh, but specifically between job and higher studies, uh, it's such a personal thing. I don't know. Uh, I won't answer that. But I just want to reassure you that if you are confused, it's okay to be confused. There's nothing wrong with that. Uh, because some people admit it, some people don't admit it. Almost everybody in that situation is confused. There is little bit of apprehension as well, because you're not sure. Let's say I want to do management. I wanted to do an MBA. Can anyone guarantee you a seat in a good management college? I don't think you can, right? Then do you want to do management in any roadside college? You don't want to do it, right? So you want to do MBA only if you get it in a good school, IIM or XLRI or Bajaj, whatever, right? So uh, I think you should, in your mind, have some options in mind and work towards uh, uh, getting each of those uh, on your plate when it comes time to decide. If you want to dig deeper into that question, I'll be happy to answer, but a very broad job versus higher studies, yeah, it's an awkward question to answer. For me, the answer was clear. I was clear that I didn't want to do a job immediately after BTech. Uh, and the reasons can be different. For some people, it can be financial. For me, it could have been partly financial, to try and do a job, but uh, honestly, I felt very diffident when I finished my BTech. It doesn't matter how well you have done during your BTech. It doesn't matter that you have what GPA you have. You need to feel confident, and I didn't feel confident that I was a good engineer. Uh, I didn't feel confident at that time that yeah, I'd learned enough. So for me, that was the main driver to uh, continue thinking of studying further.
Renakka, you can go ahead.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation. Yeah, I really like the way how you are answering the questions, honestly. Yeah, my question is like, how did you move to University of Western Europe via RPI in America? Like, how did you choose to move to America? I mean, sorry, Europe.
Hmm? You guys ask such tough questions. Sometimes even I don't have answers. But uh, when I finished my PhD, 1987, uh, uh, I was very clear that I wanted to come home at that time, uh, and I won't get into that story. But yeah, eventually I did come back in 1989. I came back to India, and then uh, I was with DMRL, ARCI, mostly in Hyderabad, all of that time. Uh, and in 2015, uh, when I was additional director of ARCI, uh, it was pretty clear that everyone expected me to be the next director uh, at ARCI, and strangely, I didn't want to be the next director of ARCI. Uh, simply because I had been additional director for 5 years. I had a pretty good idea about. Uh, as additional director, I used to be the stand-in director whenever our director was traveling. He was somewhere else, which was quite often. So I knew what my role would be as a director, and I didn't appreciate myself in that role, which was too administrative for me. For a long while before that, I missed doing things that are technical. So I made up my mind that I would say no to that position, right? But that decision was forced onto me a little bit earlier than I imagined, because to cut a long story short, the recruitment cycle for a director is pretty long in Indian institutions. They have to follow procedures, this, that, and then I suddenly thought that if I'm going to say no, I better say no right now. Uh, Otherwise, the lab would not have time to recruit somebody else, right? Because everyone was expecting that, oh, Shrikant will be the next director. After a weekend, I suddenly decided that on Monday, I'll go and tell these guys that look for somebody else. I'm not going to be the next director, however much you may want it. Uh, so I said that with the interest of the lab in mind, but then I also realized that I had not made any plan for myself. That if I say no, where do I go, right? I mean, I wasn't very clear about what I wanted to do. So I started looking for a couple of options. I thought it was good to go somewhere as a visiting uh, researcher, spend 6 months, and then decide what you want to do next in life. Honestly, that's how I came here. But things worked well, and uh, then instead of 6 months, I continued. Now it's 6 years exactly. Uh, in a couple of weeks, it will be 6 years. So I think I came here by chance more than by design.
Yes, sir. Congratulations, sir, on successfully, I mean, completing 6 years there.
Vikta, you can go ahead with your question.
I mean, sir already answered my question. I was like, why did you go for PhD? I wanted to ask that, but I think you already answered that question, sir.
Yeah, maybe I answered it only half. Let me try and complete that. As I said, I wanted to study further because I thought I didn't know enough about chemical engineering. So I had two choices at that point. Either study further to become an engineer or go to management and do something completely different where you can contribute well. So you'll not believe I actually went and registered, paid my fees at IIM Bangalore because somehow I got selected there as well. So I got uh, uh, registered at IIM Bangalore because I had not had my visa then. And as now, even at that time, people used to say that, oh, you're not sure about whether you'll get visa or not. So why do you want to let go of a good opportunity like IIM Bangalore? So I got registered there. About 8 or 9 days later was my visa appointment at the US embassy. So I went, got visa, and then I thought that yeah, my passion is still engineering and not management. So I went to RPI. When I went to RPI, I didn't directly apply for a PhD because they had already given me admission with fellowship for a master's degree. So when I went there, I found myself some strange reason. I was stuck with a project which was more in environmental engineering. I mean, nothing wrong with that. But then I had the option of continuing my PhD in environmental engineering, and somehow that was not my passion. Uh, so from there, I moved to Idaho, and uh, the, because I was excited about the problem that they wanted me to solve there. Uh, it was a project sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy. So I was more excited uh, by the problem rather than the name of the university, right? Because RPI at that time was the top chemical engineering graduate school, and Idaho was a place where not many people had even heard of Idaho. So uh, it was a very small university, but I loved the problem that I got a chance to tackle. So just a takeaway from that, I think uh, you should worry about a really good university or a really good problem that you can solve. Your destination should never be that, oh, I want to go to the US to do my PhD, right? I'm US, Europe, IIT, Bombay, doesn't matter, right? It's got to be a good institute. It's got to be a good problem that kind of fascinates you. Uh, there are so many universities in the US which are unremarkable, if I can politely say that. Yeah. So simply going to the US doesn't mean anything. Yeah, or even Europe. So uh, be careful with your choice of the institution, and choice of, if you're doing a PhD, choice of the problem.
I can somehow relate it to sir. Recently, I realized that I am that one kind of person who cannot stick to one thing. I want anything. I want something new every day. So, yeah. I mean, that's a connecting point, maybe.
Um, Nothing wrong with wanting to do something new. In fact, it's good. But every day is a problem. It's nice to be flexible, to be able to take on new challenges. That's fine. But you also need to give yourself time
Yeah.
to pick up the right skills to tackle a certain problem. Kind of decorate your CV a little bit, going
Mhm.
into depth with that particular skill, and then move on and do something else. That's okay. But
Mhm.
being restless and wanting to do something every couple of months, which is very different, yeah, you should tone down that excitement a little bit. So
Yes.
So, as being a professor, what do you think this generation students lack? Like, which quality they are lacking?
Let me first talk about the strengths of the present generation, right? Before I say what they lack. I, as a rule, I think your generation is much smarter, uh, if one were to generalize, than ours. Very quick to learn, extremely dynamic. I will also say fearless, uh, willing to take risks, and yeah, quite aggressive, wanting to do uh, multitasking. I'm completely amazed by the kind of different things uh, uh, you guys do in the Topi cell, right? Uh, when I imagine myself back in school, back in college, I don't think uh, we did even a tenth of extracurricular stuff that you guys do, right? So uh, those are all great strengths. I think uh, sometimes when I look at some of my own students, the one handicap is there is this restlessness of the kind that you spoke about just now. I mean, there is restlessness, there is urgency, right? Uh, and there is always pardon me if I am wrong, but there is always algorithm at the back of their minds, I think, which is asking them, what's in it for me if I do this, right? How do I gain if I do this, right? So it's always thinking about gains as well, apart from other things that I mentioned. And I think uh, you shouldn't worry so much about that. You should be a little bit patient. Uh, you focus on doing a good job with whatever you're doing, uh, and what's to come out of it will automatically come, right? You should not put the reward ahead of the roadmap, right? If you walk that road, you will see the destination and the reward. But asking for reward right at the beginning, as many youngsters do, I think uh, that's dangerous, right? Because it actually stops them from a having fun along the way, and b uh, walking down paths where uh, you're not assured of gains, but it could be an exciting path, right? Call them as problems with the students that I've encountered, but yeah, those are caution flags. If you're driving an F1, yeah, there is a caution flag uh, for the drivers sometimes. So these are caution flags. You should just take time.
Yes, sir, thank you. Shivani Akka, you can go with your question.
Thank you, sir, for being here.
Yeah, Shivani.
Nivedita always tells about you, like how you help her with presentation skills, time management, and all. We are really inspired by listening from her. And my question is, uh, if you go back to 18 now, what would you like to learn or do?
If I went back to being an 18-year-old now,
18 year, yes.
yeah. First of all, I would like to do some of the things that you guys do, right? Because uh, I didn't do any of those things. Uh, I didn't. Uh, I was a complete introvert. I used to have fun with my friends, but that's about it. I didn't know how to talk to people that I didn't frequently meet. I think I had uh, terrible communication skills. So it's a little bit chicken and egg, right? I think if you have poor communication skills, you're reluctant to talk to people. If you're reluctant to talk to people, you don't improve your communication skills. So it's a vicious cycle in a sense. Uh, I also didn't do things that you do in terms of coordinating events, managing events. So I think all these are very important soft skills. Uh, uh, which are crucial. And I think I did, in my opinion, I did a good job of kind of getting myself ready academically. Uh, I don't think I left any stone unturned academics wise, but apart from that, I didn't do anything, right? So if I were to go back and be an 18-year-old getting into College of Technology, I would invest more time and effort in kind of building those skills. But having said that, and this is what I tell Nivedita as well, these soft skills become important and they get recognized only if your core skill is strong, right? If your core skill is dodgy, nobody cares about soft skills. So you should tread carefully when you're trying to build your CV with all these peripheral things. I think you still need to be a good chemical engineer, right? You need to get a good engineering degree, right? For people to recognize these other skills. Just imagine you applying for a position where thousands of other people apply. What will be the first guillotine or first cutoff? It'll be GPA, right? More often than not. If it's a written test, again, the first cutoff will be the marks, and then if you get through that, if you get an opportunity to be interviewed, then all these other skills become important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Let Dorka go with your question.
Thank you, sir. Like it's been a interesting interaction right from the beginning. And the other day you were telling about surface engineering also. That was also really interesting. I wish like teachers like you and have taught the things like this. It was interesting. Thank you for that also, sir. And my question is, like, apart from thermodynamics, what was your biggest failure and what you learned from it, and like what was the learning that you want us to learn?
Tough question. Again, my literal failure, uh, if I have to go back to that, was in school. I failed twice in geography and once in Telugu, right? So, but that aside, you always learn a lot once you fail, right? You learn more from your failures than your successes. That's my honest view. You learn simply because of probably a combination of many reasons. If you fail, uh, depending upon the individual, in my case, I used to be hugely embarrassed when I failed, right? How do you come home and say that you failed in a subject? I mean, it could be school, but still, how do you go home and say that you failed? How do you tell your friends that maybe you got 100 in maths, but you got 27 in geography? How do you say that, right? So it's a big embarrassment, and you don't want to repeat that. You also realize that that could slow you down in the long run in ways. Although I'm giving geography as an example, it could slow you down in many ways, right? And that was a good example for me. My total in class was the highest, right? Despite failing in geography, but I didn't get a rank, right? Because I had failed in geography. So using that pretty small and early example in life, I did learn that you need to be at least good enough with your all your skills. You cannot have any skill which is zero, right? Or below passing level, correct? And then of course, as you move on, thermodynamics was not a failure, but it was a tough thing. But failures come your way many times. Sometimes it's because of your actions. Sometimes uh, it is because of something that you don't do. Sometimes it's simply uh, because it's unanticipated. Your experiment could be a failure, right? And I've had that many times during my PhD. That You try and do something, you think it'll work in a certain way and it doesn't, right? Uh, so for me, for every failure, a post-mortem is very important, right? If you fail, I think it's important that you take 2 steps back, sit down quietly rather than brooding over it, and try to find an answer to why did you fail or why did the experiment fail, right? Uh, that kind of post-mortem is what actually educates you eventually. So uh, I don't think you should be worried about failure uh, because you learn a lot from that. You should worry more about lack of effort, absence of discipline. Yeah, I would worry more about that if I was your kind of age, right? But if you put in your best effort uh, and you work diligently, you work hard, and still end up in failure, it's okay, right? Because uh, if you do what one expects you to do, which is sit down and think why it failed, you do end up learning a lot. So failures are fine. Failures don't worry me. But lack of effort, lack of discipline, in the long run, they hurt you a lot more than the failure.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So this is a question from our senior Nikhil Anna. Like we want, I mean, not only from Anna, like even I wanted to know what is your view on hydrogen energy?
I mean, what view can you have? Because right now I'm writing at least couple of other research proposals that are totally involved with hydrogen energy. So clearly it's a path that we as a community need to look at very, very closely. You look around us and there's so many problems. There could be some stupid politicians who say, oh, global warming is a big sham. Actually, there's nothing called global warming, but the fact is that it is there, right? Uh, the fact also is that we are going to run out of conventional sources of energy, right? So yeah, you have to invest in hydrogen, you have to invest in other renewable means of energy, be it wind, hydro, solar, whatever. The challenge that comes, which, for example, I face here, is you're preparing for the future. While you're preparing for the future, many times uh, the present doesn't understand or appreciate the importance, right? So it was the same even when I was at the ARCI, which was what, 10 years ago. We were trying to develop materials for hydrogen absorption, right? How do you absorb hydrogen? How do you release hydrogen? But if the environment at that time, environment means not air and all, but general environment around you is not appreciative of that problem, then it doesn't get the attention that it demands, right? So maybe the industry says, and that's a problem here. If I'm thinking of something which I think may be useful 4, 5, 10 years from now, the industry today doesn't appreciate it, and if the industry today doesn't appreciate it, those kind of research projects don't get funded, right? So there are hurdles, but I think something like hydrogen energy, a lot of people are investing in it, and I think we should all do as much as we can to see if that is technically and economically viable in the long run. So,
So, like my other question was, even Anna's other question was, like now we are using electrolyzers to produce hydrogen, right, sir? Splitting of water and then producing hydrogen. So, like we are using electrodes in it. So, what is the scope of using a catalyst or surface coating on electrodes?
I don't think that has a simple answer because there are different types of electrodes. The requirements from the electrodes is so different. But yeah, coatings, for instance, is one approach. I won't say it's the only approach, but it certainly is one of the interesting approaches because it provides you with the ability to kind of control the microstructure. You can have controlled porosity, for example, which is equally important when it comes to catalysis because it increases surface area and things like that. So yeah, it's a more involved question, but the short answer is yes. There are coating approaches which are exciting. At the moment, we are doing something similar also with solid state thin film batteries. Um, so I have a project now where I've proposed that maybe you can use coatings to make the two electrodes as well as the electrolyte uh, by a technique which nobody's done before. So it's all exploratory. I don't even know if uh, I will be successful, although I have that project. But it's fun to try, especially if the so-called experts think that they'll give me money for it. So, yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good evening, sir. This is
Hi.
Benny Joseph. I'm pursuing. Hi, sir. I'm pursuing my BTech Computers in Kakatiya University, Kottagudem. I'm happy that you came to this group, sir, and I'm thankful for you that you're giving such a motivation to us. Sir, my question is, when we have a drawback in our studies or when we do fail in a subject or anything like that, what kind of motivation do you give for us, and what is a timetable that you give to us, sir?
I think I partly answered that question earlier. If you have a setback, if you have failed, uh, the best thing to do is to sit down and try and understand why you failed. Uh, One of the biggest problems with such a post-mortem, I call it a post-mortem. The biggest problem with such a post-mortem is I think our mind is inadvertently trained to lie to ourselves. Yeah, we don't give honest answers to ourselves, right? So if I fail, it's very easy for me to say, oh, I have a lousy teacher for this subject, right? Uh, or say, oh, he asked me questions which were out of portion or some crazy thing like that, right? Uh, y- you you should be honest. Why did you fail? Did you invest enough time in studying? Did you uh, at the end of each day did you go back home and read what was taught in class and made sure that you are not carrying doubts which were unresolved at the end of the day, so that tomorrow if the guy teaches you something else, uh, uh, sir or madam in class, you don't understand it because you have not understood what happened yesterday, right? So that doubt, then you don't understand tomorrow. Then on the third day you again attend class, don't understand anything because you have not understood what happened the last 2 days, right? You need to be honest with getting a good idea of what caused that failure. Then I'm sure almost every individual is smart enough uh, to set it right, right? Uh, the problems usually come if you're not truthful to yourself, one, or B, you've you've delayed asking yourself why you're having that problem for too long, right? Yeah. If you don't do it today, same day, if you don't do it the same week, if you wait for it till the night before your final exam, it's too late.
Also ask that what timetable, like what kind of chart do you give to us as like I have friends.
Good thing. I mean, uh, if you spoke with Nivedita, she'll tell you that I'm always harping on her about timetable, right? or Excel sheet, and I did that twice or thrice, and then I stopped, right? And I told her that you're not making the timetable for me, right? If you think you're making timetable for your mentor who you meet once a week, it's already a disaster. If you're making it for yourself, then the story is different, right? First of all, you must have faith, and you must think that it's important for you, correct? That timetable, that's one. So what you make timetable with some end objective in mind. Let's say you're making a timetable to because you want to ensure that you will study for 2 hours every day, right? And things can go crazy in everybody's life. Yeah, so 2 hours every day may not be so practicable. Yeah, suddenly you have India, England playing a match, and England is losing wickets, and you want to go and see TV, right? Because India is doing well, right? And you have no time. So that's okay. Suddenly there is a boxing match, some Indian lady fighting for gold, you want to go see, right? So anything can happen. But if your target is 2 hours a day, I would ask myself, am I putting in 14 hours a week, right? That's fair. I may not manage 2 hours a day. I may not manage 4 hours tomorrow. But if Sunday comes, do I put in 6 hours because I missed 4 hours, right? If you don't take corrective action against whatever plan you yourself have made, there's no point in making timetables. There's no point in making plans, because you make plans to accomplish some success. And I think the most crucial factor is, what corrective action do you take? If that plan is going for a toss, what is the corrective action do you take? If you take no corrective action, don't bother with making plans, right? Because you're fooling yourself. If you take corrective action, then it's okay, right? I mean, if you take corrective action, like, oh, I had planned a movie for this Sunday, but for various things I have not put in the time for doing X, Y, Z during the week, so I will not go for my movie on Sunday, right? If you take corrective action like that, it's okay. If you're not taking corrective action, just don't bother, right? Because you're fooling yourself by trying to make a timetable, trying to make a plan. No, you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for somebody else. So don't even waste your time on that.
Thank you, sir, for answering my question. It's a pleasure to have you with us here.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me this motivation, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sir, like, who is your inspiration or role model and why?
Inspiration or role model, okay. I had different people at different times. My role model to work extremely hard was once again my supervisor, right? Later on, when I started doing a job in DMRL, it was our late President Abdul Kalam, because I remember having worked on a project with him, and I liked his simplicity. I liked how hard he worked, things like that. Just as with mentors, you could have different role models for different things. Many times I listen to a certain speaker, and I always tell myself, oh, I wish I could talk like him or her, right? I wish I was as smooth as this person that I'm listening to. It's the same with teachers, right? I find some teachers, I knew a couple when I was at University of Hyderabad as the dean, who were just outstanding, right? And so different role models for different aspects that you want to cultivate within yourself. But I've just had too many. Even my wife is my role model for for being disciplined, for forcing me to go for a walk every morning or follow my diet. I don't do that very well, and yeah, she's my role model for that. So yeah, you'll be surprised how many people you can be inspired by for different things. But bottom line, you need to be truthful to yourself. For all of these things to work, you need to be true to yourself. I mean, you should be clear about what you want to accomplish. You should be able to see those uh, prop uh, kind of features in somebody else, right? And then you find your role model automatically, I think, pretty much.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We were having that doubt what to do and what to do after our engineering or to jump in job or to higher studies like that. Our question was clear. So we're thanking you for giving us this motivation.
And we attend many of your sessions, sir.
This is our first session, sir. So we really enjoyed this first session, and we hope we will attend many more sessions like this in future.
Yeah, sure. But that's always a tough question, job or studying further. And unfortunately, some of us have constraints. Some of us may be forced to do a job for financial reasons or whatever, right? So it's very much regardless of how many people you talk to some extent it's a personal decision at the end of the day, right? Depending on circumstances, but it's always nice if you don't have constraints, if you just want to know what does a job involve, what does going ahead and doing a PhD involve, or what does management involve. It always helps to I think talk to your immediate seniors, right, who've walked that route. Because for example, if you ask me also, I could be pretty outdated when it comes to doing management or what kind of job options that opens up and things like that. So it's nice to talk to someone that you can connect with rather well, yeah, and who's not an old guy like me.
So, like, I have a comment, sir. Like, you have a very charming smile.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nobody's told me that before, but yeah.
And a cool voice.
Well, because it's coming from far, maybe you think it has cooled off along the way somewhere. Assuming that we are winding up, I really enjoyed talking to all of you. Hi, Meena. Hello.
Hi, I have a comment. Hello. So I have a crazy question. Are you standing and talking, Shrikant?
Yes, I almost always do that, especially during the pandemic now. All my online classes and all, I've been doing standing up.
Is there a reason for that? You know, you get backache or something?
Partly that. Partly I think, yeah, it's just more comfortable. But backache is one of them.
Yeah, but then also you are used to classroom sessions?
I don't teach so much because my role here is mostly research. But once in a while, I'm asked to kind of fill in gaps in lectures wherever they think an old guy can provide some different insight.
I'm equal age.
So you can understand what I'm saying.
Okay, I was listening to everything that was going on and I enjoyed it also. You're a very smooth talker. Shrikant, you don't need another role model. You are a smooth talker also. I mean, everything made sense. And baat sense, I could make out very nicely, thoughtfully you were talking and well articulated. I enjoyed.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Now you know why the children adore you. Yeah.
Thanks.
I keep thinking that, oh, I introduced Shrikant to this Thope cell. So I feel
which you did, and I am grateful to you as well because I
yeah, the
enjoyed very
students
much.
and you. I'm feeling great about that. They're benefiting a lot. I can see that.
Hmm? Great.
There's a question in comment section. Can I read it?
Yeah, please. Hmm?
Sir, did you face any regret? If so, how did you overcome it? By Swapna.
Did I face any regrets? I would be lying if I said no. I mean, there are always regrets. I think the only question is how much importance do you attach to it. There are regrets which are outside your control, which you just need to take in your stride. There are regrets which derive from your own actions, and you just try and learn from them as much as you can. They could take different forms, right? I mean, for example, regret taking on a couple of students as my PhD students along the way, right? I've learned from that, right? So I've learned how to be more cautious uh, when I pick students. So there are of course regrets. There are regrets in sometimes quickly saying yes to a friend to do something, right? Without really understanding how much effort it involves, right? But then you're committed. So yeah, regret takes different forms. Uh, some are, as I said, beyond your control, but others, yeah, you take them in your stride, and whenever possible, you learn from them. The important thing is you should not look back with regret, right? I mean, that is important. Uh, for instance, I have always made an effort to not think back and ask myself, "Arey, if I'd stayed with IIM Bangalore, क्या होता था मेरे life का?" I mean, th- that's not the kind of regret which you should carry as baggage throughout your life, right? Just yeah, I don't know if I answered that question, but uh, my different views on the topic of regret.
Yes, sir. You answered. Thank you. Do anyone have any questions or comments to add? I would like to give a vote of thanks. It's my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks. Thank you, Srikant Joshi, sir, for spending your valuable time and letting us know about your inspiring journey. You are amazing, sir. Thank you, Shravan, sir, and everyone for attending this session. Now, I would present a gratitude card by gratitude.
Hey, Pranit, you should give me a chance to say thanks as well because uh, time really flew. I was wondering what would happen over a period of an hour and 15 minutes or 1.5 hours, but it went off so quick, and I really enjoyed the range of questions that all of you asked. So good luck to everyone in eCell. Keep doing what you do so well. Yeah, it's been amazing for me to watch this group grow, and that's why I thank Meena for kind of getting me in. It's been wonderful, and thank you for this opportunity as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Srikant Joshi, sir, for accepting our invitation and giving us a talk. We loved the way you answered all our questions honestly. Thank you for inspiring us with your beautiful journey, sir. It was great in interacting with you and listening to your way of living the life with full of challenges is so motivating. We like the unique you who inspires us to become best versions of ourselves. Thank you for spending your valuable time for us. So gratitude. Now
Thank you.
we'll wind up the session with gratitude quote by Sandhya.
We only see what we are prepared to see. If we look for what is good and what we can be grateful for, we will find it everywhere. Thank you.
Excellent. I
Thank you.
like that one.